Well, it's true, though. I mean, we are living in an era where cruelty is being glorified in a way that we haven't seen in our lifetimes. And I know we have to wrap up, but we could in another day go through an entire, I think we could actually show somewhat of a through line there from going from money obsession and selfishness and intellectual decline to cruelty. I do not think that they are unrelated. I think they're causally related. Hey everybody, welcome to Good Guys Getting Better. I'm Christian Hanley.
Aleem, Boatright.
And I'm John Borden.
So guys, I know we talk about a wide range of things on this pod since we started, but this past week, the thing we cannot get past is what's going on in Israel. You know, a week ago yesterday, so last Saturday, was when Hamas launched this horrific attack on civilians in Israel. And of course, now there is the retaliation with Israel now going into Gaza and basically locking down the Gaza Strip. And the government's stated intention is to quote unquote destroy Hamas. And I'm sure that by the time this goes live, there will be updates and changes. The story's going to keep on evolving, but that's sort of where things are right now. And then here at home in the U.S., we're dealing with a lot of sort of the politics and moral conversations about the conflict that I want to get into because, well, for a few different reasons. But one is that I think that what a lot of Americans are doing, whether people on social media or even elected officials, is kind of centering Americans in all of this as though like we're the stars of the show, and we're not. Even though there's a lot to be said about who and what and how we support, as the world's remaining superpower. And then, yeah, there's also been just a swirl of disinformation about what's going on the ground right now. So, with that, let's get into it. John, I know you were talking about how you were doing some reading last night. And actually this is on one of the Pod Save America pods offline, either last night or this morning, just the idea that, some of the information we're getting out from the conflict is either wildly inaccurate, or by the time we're consuming it here, it's already outdated.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing that needs to be said is that there is a really scary humanitarian issue that we are on the precipice of, if not already completely in. Into trying to sort out, figure out as a global community, you know, so to decentralize it from the U.S., I think is a really important thing, and to humanize the people that are in Palestine, that are in Gaza, and also make human the people that are suffering in Israel and distinguish out the acts of the government, you know, like the people really caught in the middle. With that said, a lot of the reporting that is kind of initially giving this justification and this thrust for global collaboration is this idea that Hamas was beheading children. And as you dig through it, there's been a lot of reporting subsequent to that, and a lot of backtracking at some of the major news outlets, including, not that it's a news outlet, but the White House. President Biden came on last week and said he never thought that he would see, you know, something to the fact that he never thought that he would have to look at women and children being beheaded. And within a day or so, the White House walked that back because the president hadn't seen those. And he was relying on information that he had received from the Israeli government, who had received that from the IDF. But when you really got close to what the actual source is, no one's been able to verify whether or not that happened. The concern that I have with that is the expediency with which we go into stereotypes. You know, like, you know, it's easy, it's believable for people to digest that because we're, you know, almost reflexively jumping into Islamophobia, you know, which is ironic because that is to assume that every Palestinian is Muslim, you know, and that they have this common thing that binds them and that they all want death to Israel. And then you got the other swing on that. Like, got to be really careful about anti-Semitism right now as well,
which has been on the rise for several years now, here and abroad.
Right, and that's where I get back. I'm like, look, there's certainly an element of anti-Semitism that led to the creation of the state of Israel. Like, it wasn't too far before Israel was founded that Jews were being hunted and exterminated en masse all throughout continental Europe, right? So there's a people issue that I don't think gets the credit that it's due, and so much of the news has been focused on the political situation and the war. But the actors, the political actors, Hamas, their issue, I have strong issue with them using the 2 million Palestinians as a shield for them to act in such a way when they are outpersoned and outgunned and they are surrounded. Like it is reckless. It's insensitive. It is, there are so many superlatives. And at the same time,
can we just, before we go past that though, can we just drill down on that for a second? Because that's a huge point that we shouldn't miss, is that, and this is like going to be my mantra for this entire conversation. I am sorry to say, but like two different truths can coexist at the same time. There are plenty of things that where one does not refute the other that are not mutually exclusive. But in the case of Hamas, you're right. They don't represent all or even most Palestinians. And when you look at the depravity of their actions, whether or not the specifics that have been reported out in the early days were accurate or not, you look at those depraved actions and you know that they know the response they're going to get for that. And yet they do it knowing that, and knowing that the 2 million people that they purport to represent are the ones who are going to be harmed by their actions. They're going to be responsible, either directly or indirectly, for the deaths of Palestinians, the same as they're responsible for the death of Israelis.
Yeah, and like, look, the other thing, I've heard some analysis. And I want to also be sensitive to the fact that the Palestinian people have been under siege for a long time. Like there are 1 million kids in Palestine right now. Like, all they have known is being in what many call the largest open air prison in the world. Like, this is what they know. And the constant fear and terror and trauma of being in that. And Hamas, rather than saying like, look, we've got to, and this is, my perspective, but, there is an element of, okay, well, what can we do to better the lives of these people right now? Like, what can we do to stop the blockade? Like, how can we advance peace? Now, with that said, you could make the same argument that the current government and political coalition that's leading Israel has no interest in that to begin with. So the question is, it's like, what options do you have? Like, that government has been very clear with what their intentions are and how they are going to go about pursuing them. So Aleem and I were talking about this earlier this week. It really feels, and a few people that are really that I've talked to that are really confused with how to feel. Like, this is one of the most complicated political, and we're observing it from afar, but one of the most complicated geopolitical and humanitarian issues that I can understand, because it really feels, more like there's a level of internal conflict that we can't begin to comprehend because we're not there. In the same way that, like, it's difficult to opine, on the Civil War, because you can just look at the consequences at 30,000 feet, but when you get close to the ground, it's something totally different. So I do think that this is, I don't even want to put labels on it, because it's just, it feels like it's too complicated. I know we're going to talk about the moral implications of it, but it's so complicated to think about. Where do you go? And the only place that I can land, and Christian, you and I have talked about this in another context, but it's like, they're just innocent people that are trying to get by on a day by day. Yeah. And, the political actions of, for whatever motivates Hamas, like whatever motivates, the Israeli government, anytime you're using people as a shield, or using your political cover as a field, like Benjamin Netanyahu, like all of a sudden, this guy is as indictable as Donald Trump. And now he gets to puff out his chest and have this bravado about what they're going to do with
all
Gaza.
1 week.
And, just 2 years ago, he was, trying to stay out of jail. and trying to change the
less
laws.
Than that, yeah.
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 He lost office, was indicted for, I think, some corruption and fraud charges. And now he gets to look like just your regular old, head of state, making responsible decisions to defend his people.
Yeah. And
it's just like,
exactly. No.
Much like Rudy Giuliani escaped any kind of, I dare say it, blame, but any kind of responsibility for the inefficiencies that led to certain people entering into the Twin Towers and being able to communicate and all that. Now the problem is that Bibi is not going to get his proper criticism for missing this as a security blunder, right? A lack of security, because like, okay, well, blame those who did it, which is rightly so. Blame those people who committed the crime, so to speak. But at the same time, well, was he ineffective in the job that he said he was so great at, which was protecting the state of Israel? I don't know, but he's not going to get credit right now. Certainly not now, and that's the unfortunate consequence of this. But I wanted to.
Well, that's why. Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, please go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I'll collect my thoughts and I'll come back to another thought.
I was just going to interject quickly on that point, and that's what makes me very nervous right now that the initial shock is only just beginning to wear off, and we're talking about consequences and retaliation and that sort of thing, is that you think about in the case of our country 22 years ago now, when September 11th happened, and like, let's be clear that I'm not the one drawing the parallels here. It was the Israeli ambassador drawing the parallels between September 11th and this attack the morning after, or 2 mornings after, on the, on American roundtable discussions on TV. And, it was on Morning Joe and MSNBC, in fact, on Monday, I think it was, or Tuesday. And they're drawing those comparisons. And I'm thinking back to the case of George W. Bush, who, you think about all of the controversy and legal problems surrounding his election, his being installed into power and everything. And then September 11th happened, and all of a sudden that reset button gets hit. I mean, people forget, like, even in the United States, TV shows mocking him for his stupidity and arrogance got canceled, like taken off Comedy Central. Bill Maher got fired from ABC. Think of him whatever you want, but it was because of his comments about that attack. And what is concerning now with Benjamin Netanyahu is that this guy who clearly feels as though he's above the law, national and international, who's tried to reform the judiciary such that his executive branch gets more power, and who, like we just said, was very recently trying to keep his own behind out of prison, now is feeling like, well, he's untouchable. He's got the cover that a head of state gets, or a head of government gets, when their state has fallen under attack.
And for all intents and purposes, he's been in power for what? Almost 16, 20. Well, how many years has it been? 10.
Well, he's had several different terms, but yes, I mean, he's been on the national stage. Yeah, since the early 2000s. Late 90s.
Exactly. So the question is that if he and his policy and his approach to this situation was so effective, how does this happen? That people don't ask those. Right. Like, okay, well, my job was to keep everyone safe, and that's what I'm the security guy, and yet the biggest event in 50 years happens under my watch. Okay, so maybe, just maybe, the policies and the approach and the philosophy by which you are leading this country has driven it into a situation where now people have more to fear than they did before. That's the problem. People don't ask these questions. It's like, there's one of the simplest quotes I've been seeing periodically for a long time is that, and I don't know who to attribute it to, but is, if war is the only answer, then you must be asking the wrong question. And that's where I think we find ourselves in this space today, is that if you're saying, okay, we're going to defend ourselves against aggression, then you've got to start asking your question, why are people aggressive towards us? And what do we do to prevent them from being aggressive? And to tone things down, and this is it. I mean, the tragedies of what we've seen over this last week is just the death and the escalate. I remember speaking to my father, many years ago when I was probably a teen, just trying to understand the Middle East as we term it. We put the Holy Land and all of these things, and why there was such conflict. And I remember, vividly the feeling of despair that I came away from those conversations with. Like, well, how's this ever going to resolve itself? I hit an intellectual wall of like, there's no solution. It's like, if people, as they are thinking right now, this will never end. It's just either someone will be eradicated or multiple people will be eradicated. It'll be amazingly, destructive forever. I think, you have a moral compass that should guide you with whatever way you choose to defend yourself. We don't just do anything in defense of ourselves or those we love, but at the same time, people can certainly easily breach those walls of when they feel despair, when they feel everything. So I don't agree with it, but I definitely it helps to understand where it's coming from, and I think ultimately preventing people's from, and I use the S on that one, preventing people's from getting to that point of despair is very key to preventing terrorism, right? That, making sure that people understand is that, hey, we're still trying to solve this problem. We actually care about solving this problem. Yes, we disagree with each other, but we don't discount you. We don't look at you as not worthy of life, and that type of thing. Because once you get the impression that we look at you that way, then you're going to start looking at us that way, and that's when you start seeing this insanity of attacking innocence and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I thought about this a lot for many years, and I think there's some important historical context that also kind of leads up to this moment. One, as to the best that I could understand, Israel is not a religious state; it's a secular state, and it's constitutionally, it's a secular state, and the state was formed in 1948. But the boundaries for the state were formed in 1916 with Sykes-Picot, right? So this goes back a long time. This is World War I. This is, to your point, Aleem, this is the British working in collaboration with the Jordanians to expel the Turks from the Holy Land, right? And obviously they're successful. Sykes-Picot was formed, as I believe, without the knowledge of the Jordanians, and they were operating under the assumption that they would take control of the Holy Land. And just that piece of land once the Turks were successfully defeated, which happened. The problem is that they weren't given that, and instead, I think his name was Hussein, becomes ultimately the king or the emir of Jordan, and the modern state of Jordan. It is what it is now. And just like in America right now, so many of our political issues are wrapped up in morality issues, and religious issues, and they are paper thin when like wherever you fall on abortion, if it's not a part of a narrative of human decency and the protection of life. It is a very approachable and easy to digest religious/moral issue. And I don't know all the nuances of what's happening in Israel and Gaza, but it feels like a lot of the same. Like people are taking advantage of deeply held religious beliefs that are really important and personal to people and then weaponizing them. Like I think, all of us are familiar with the sacred Jewish texts and their commentary on how you should treat, your neighbor. I recognize that is, blending a little New Testament language in there. And with that said, it's not all the same. There's also very much a combative nature to the Old Testament. But what I am saying is that, these aren't necessarily political issues. They're religious issues, or kind of religious things, but the politics bringing that in makes it bad. And the same thing I think applies, for, and I don't know enough about how Hamas uses Islam, but, my point is like pitting these religions against each other is really politically expedient and convenient, and the losers again are people. And then, of course, Christians also exist in that space as well, and I don't know if there are any more Zoroastrians in and around there, but anyway, like everyone has kind of occupied this different space, and some of the initial issues were, political more than they were religious, like the Turks were, the Ottoman Empire was ostensibly are religious, but they were bad people, that they were corrupt. They wanted to get them out. So, I am very nervous when I start to see, wolf in sheep's clothing as it pertains to some of these issues. Even, I don't want to shift it, but like, what did I say? Or sheep in wolf's clothing? Did I get it wrong? Wolf in sheep's clothing. I was right.
Much like in this country, I'm very sensitive to the fact that this is a political issue that is wrapped up in something moral, like a deeply held religious belief. And it will be used as justification to do whatever. Like the history of this particular area is far more complex than two dueling religions.
Right.
And really three. Even if you have all the Abrahamic religions, it's, this goes back. People just throw it out all the time, like you said. Oh, it's been going on for thousands of years. Between who? Islam was founded in the 8th century.
Right.
It ain't, 1,200
it's
years.
By
is a lot
far
different.
the youngest. Yeah, it's by far the youngest of the Abrahamic religions. Yeah.
And I don't even think the Christians, in essence, really get there and take a foothold until the 4th century, after Constantine. Right. So what are we talking about in terms of conflict? Now, it's not. The Jews have been dispossessed from time to time, and there have been different people that have come in. But this isn't just 3 people duking it out. Since time immemorial.
Exactly, yeah.
Right.
So it's not,
right.
The Christians are, with the Crusades were bloody, disgusting people. So it's like, no one is, innocent, or no one has a more innocent right to the space. So I just, this is where it makes me really uncomfortable to almost even draw perspectives. But from a human perspective, it's like, look, the things are setting up for a whole bunch of innocent people to die just to solve a political, to grind up political acts. Yeah. And that is what's deeply concerning to me, because our politics, more globally, is moving further and further away from having compassion. From more and more considering the human cost of war, like you were just talking about. Like World War I, again, because it was over 100 years ago, it was the Great War. It was the war to end all wars. Like, I forget the stats, like just the death rate on continental Europe. But it was something that you would have hoped to never have seen again. And then obviously World War II, you up the ante because technology's vastly improved in about 30 years. But it's like the human cost and the generational human cost. Right, like we're talking about what's happening right now. Like, folks are going to have to be dealing with this for maybe generations. There is a lingering effect to these decisions, and there's such a callousness in the language. There's such a callousness with how people are willing to discard facts. It's just like, this is my political agenda. I want to solve this. This is what keeps me in power. I have to do it. And you see the same thing happening in this country. And this is not, I'm not trying to draw an apples to apples, issue, but this is what gets people killed. When you are callous and reckless with your language and you don't consider the human cost of your actions. We talked about this last time. That's not leadership. That's not leadership. That's staying in power. Those are two totally different things. And it's difficult to, there's so many people protesting now, like, this is going to become a global issue. And it is drawing everyone into this conception of this binary, eternal struggle that two religions are having. And it's like, to your point, Aleem, if you just scratch below the facts just a little bit, it's like, okay, the nuance isn't hard to find.
Yeah. I didn't want to leave that point too quickly, John. I think it's really what you made is really important. But I did want to. Something you said reminded me of something I wanted to bring out as well. Just thinking about the notion of how this conflict has unfolded, it makes me a little concerned in that oppressed peoples or people who are feeling oppression. Fighting a physical war to try and bring themselves out of that oppression. And I for several years now, probably a good decade or so, I've come to the conclusion, from my perspective, that that's not going to be effective. Just fundamentally, I think, unfortunately, the powers of the world have gotten so good at waging war that fighting back, fist to fist, arm to arm, can't find success. You have to find it on a different playing field, so to speak. And so what concerns me is that those those who are making decisions in Hamas, for example, they either are misguided in their understanding of the ability or the willingness of those with power to decimate them, to murder them, and eliminate them, or they have some ulterior motive that's not fully disclosed at this point. Because there's no context in which you're going to fight Hamas against the Israeli government and army, defense force, and win directly. If this is not a David and Goliath story from many, many centuries ago. There are real technological differences that you cannot.
Oh yeah.
So
that's yeah. And no, because I have a question for you there, and I know we're kind of taking a little bit of a tangent from sort of the more moral and humanitarian issue, but I have been wondering this all week long, and maybe you guys can help me understand, because this is the point that you just brought up, Aleem, that I cannot wrap my head around. Even if you assume that this was launched as a terrorist attack to achieve a political goal, which that's pretty much the definition of terrorism, right? You're going to harm civilians, to make a political point, right? Even if you assume that this was born out of a hatred for Israel or a feeling of oppression, or even if, right? What was the intended end game? Like, exactly. I can't see, I've been trying to figure out, like, aside from like having like a 24-hour, 48-hour period of pure shock and awe after that, like, for the people who planned this within Hamas, I can't understand. I can't understand what they thought the upside would be.
I have some analysis or some thoughts on that, if I may, Aleem.
Sure.
One, I think it's difficult for me to think that this was Hamas alone. Like, flying very much under the radar is the coordination and the support that they immediately received from Hezbollah. Mm-hmm. And they're, the Pod Save America and Pod Save the World, they were talking about, this might be a proxy for Hezbollah to draw the U.S. into another conflict. Mm-hmm. I think there are broader global geopolitical implications. And once again, the Palestinian people are being used as proxy. The Israeli people are being used as proxies, to wage a different war and a different battle. And that to me is a more plausible than Hamas, and this isn't like the first time Hamas has sent rockets into Israel. Like this mm-hmm. doesn't seem, right. It almost seems inconsistent with what they've done over the last decade in terms of incursions into Israel. Like, it was far more brazen. It was far mm-hmm. more public, like where and how they actually chose to attack. To your point, well, you knew what the reaction was going to be, but I think you only make that leap if you are throwing in the towel and just saying, like, hey, this is the last act, we're going to go to this place, or, mm-hmm. You are doing it with a much longer game at hand and there are other actors that aren't obvious at play. And what is happening mm-hmm. right now is you're seeing a reaction to the reaction. Like, if the first 48 hours where this is what it was like on 9/11 in the U.S., it only lasted 24 to 48 hours because now there were protests happening all over the world on behalf of the Palestinians. So was the end game to make this a truly political issue and really draw Israel out? And, like, look, I'm talking purely politics, not perspective or opinion. But if we're talking mm-hmm. political strategy, the question is this to draw out what they perceive to be the barbarity of the Israeli government, knowing that this is the way that they're going to act? It's plausible. Like, I don't think, again, thinking about their the way that they do this, in knowing, it's not that they don't know the Israeli military superiority. Everyone does. They know that they have, $3.8 billion a year from the United States of America in military funding. And they know, as President Biden said, that the United States of America is still arguably the greatest superpower on the planet, has a quote unquote rock solid relationship with Israel that won't waver. So I can't believe that there isn't something more. This isn't just Hamas just escalating an attack. There has to be more to it.
So that latter concept, I did actually consider that. I'm like, well, they wanted to make this a bigger issue, put it on the world stage, put it in the forefront of people's minds, the barbarity of the response and this type of thing. And I was like, okay, I get that. Again, intellectually, I'm not saying I agree in any way, shape, or form with any of them.
Of course. Yeah, right. You comprehend.
Yes, I can comprehend that. But
right.
When you contextualize that with, okay, that's going to cost thousands of lives to do that.
Right.
Is that worth it? You only got about a couple million people there. It's like, again, I'm an engineer, so I'm going to go to just numbers. I fall back on numbers.
Right.
You're going to lose an appreciable percentage of your population of men, women, and children.
Yes.
Just to fight this battle. That to me is insanity. Frankly, that now, it just doesn't make sense. This, I draw parallels. Over years, you have conversations about conflicts in history and other oppressed peoples fighting for their freedom and their survival, and people a lot of times they draw this comparison, if you will, between the Native American tribes of the indigenous peoples tribes that fought against imperialism from the British and from the Americans and so forth and so on over here, and in the African Americans who came up out of slavery but didn't necessarily rebel in mass in the same way that the indigenous people say, oh well, yeah, I want to fight like them, or even aligning themselves with more take up arms notions, even during the civil rights movement, like those led by the speakers like Malcolm X and that sort of thing. It's like, well, I want to fight back and so forth. But I think the difference is that you see what happened to the indigenous peoples through that fight, right? When you take up arms and try to fight toe to toe in that way against, a technologically superior force, you're going to sacrifice a lot, and they lost a lot. There were entire groups of people eradicated through that fight, through that struggle, and that's tragic. Now, it's arguable that leaders of the civil rights movement who decided to take an approach where you're not going to fight back, you're going to speak out, you're going to take the abuse, and you're going to let people see that and let that change people's minds. Arguably, that prevailed, right? That got things done. Now, it sacrificed the health and well-being of several people. Certain people put themselves in harm's way, but inarguably, in my opinion, led to far less death, far less murder.
Oh, it did, and it was also it gets oversimplified now, but it was a very complicated and well orchestrated effort that was not just marches and songs. Yes. You're talking about everything from a political aspect to a media aspect to an organizing aspect that drew upon decades of experience and accumulated knowledge from the labor movement. There was a lot there. It gets romanticized, but it was a very complex and orchestrated strategy executed across several different states with many different organizations, each with having different areas of focus. I think, though, to your point, just looking at the math in a very, you're engineering cold and calculating way, but honestly, that's the part that I've been stuck on in this conflict all week, is exactly what you just said, Aleem, is that if you are going to, first of all, can we appreciate the fact for a moment that those who made the decision to launch this initial massacre last Saturday did so never mind without a vote of any parliament or Congress or whatever, but with like no input whatsoever from the people who they were going to be using as human shields in the weeks and months to come, right? Go ahead and do it.
Before you get point.
Yeah.
And people sometimes hear that human shield of somebody holding you in front of you. That's not exact human shield in the fact that they're now in the country and there's civilians in the way of the people trying to get at them. So they don't even have to be deliberately human shields, but they are human shields now.
Right.
Because,
I'm sorry. Right. I just one other point. Hopefully, when we review this, everyone sees how inordinately long Aleem's finger was. And it was so close to the camera. Aleem, that freaked me out, man. Like, you're going to get...
Now I want to see. Oh.
Arsenio, I'm sorry. Please continue, Christian. I should have been today.
I forgot what I was saying. No, just, yes, exactly that. That if you're going up against, like, even if your strategy is to draw out not just the Israeli Defense Forces, but the United States military and cost us people, cost us munition, cost us money, fine. But, I mean, the scale, right? Like the entire population of Gaza, you could fit into, literally any single tiny corner of America. I heard one Israeli politician, interviewed by ABC a couple of days ago who said that Gaza is not in population. It's very densely packed. It's very overpopulated, but just in terms of land area is, like the United States was 4,550 times the size or something just completely inordinate, right? And if you don't have the sort of size, population, budget, military, technology, all these things, and you do something like this, you are in my estimation, because what I'm trying to get to here, right, is I am not going to be, or I'm not going to try to be ignorant or arrogant and assume that I understand or that I know what is behind someone else's decision making, or assume likely falsely that they're just being stupid, right? I want to assume there's something more to it than that to be understood, even if you disagree with it, right? But I can't wrap my head around that. What would be the end game if you know that going into it, you're not just going to kill a bunch of civilians who belong to a group you don't like, but your own people are going to be the ones who suffer the most, guaranteed.
Absolutely.
I want to go back to something that that Aleem said right before your comment, Christian, just kind of drawing these parallels. The indigenous tribes in America, they were defending themselves. Like this wasn't aggression by them. This was defending colonialism. And I think the Palestinians would make that same argument. And I think Hamas, although I think falsely, would use that to say, like, we're just defending ourselves. And I think there's some element of truth to that. But Christian, I think your point is really well stated. Okay. Who did you consult with? What parliament? Right. Who did you consult with before you put our lives at stake? And then I think the civil rights movement, which I forget, I want to say it might be Dean Crooms now, at Hustle Christian. Like at what point did the civil rights movement become civil and not human rights movement? And I think, that's the play, yes, we are receiving what is promised to us under the Constitution, but that is a human issue, not just a civil issue. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier. When you reduce this to a civil issue and not a human issue, it makes it a lot easier to make these cold calculations, because you're not dealing with people, you're dealing with numbers, you're dealing with statistics. If 6,000 Palestinians are killed, but we are able to live, then it was worth it. But then the question is always, who are you to make that decision for one life, let alone thousands? So again, if this fails to be a human issue and is only a political and only a civil issue, then this is where you get to. And by the way, the political and civil issues are the continuity piece from the indigenous people here and the descendants of slaves that were brought here descendants of slaves in the United States of America. Like all of these were political decisions. Everything from 3/5 to Jim Crow. These are all political decisions. These aren't human decisions. And if you engage in the humanity of people, it changes the equation. Because you can't make that same thing. Because this is my personal belief. I can't, unless Aleem or Christian, like you two are my dear friends. If you say, John, I'm putting my life in your hand, I want you to make a life or death decision for me because I need it. You have given that to me. I'm not going to make a life or death decision for you, Christian, just because I happen to be there.
This might not be the best time to tell you, maybe 2 years or more, 3 years after the fact. But since I got divorced, I've kind of been making you my emergency contact.
All right. Well, yeah. Hey,
probably should have mentioned that.
By the way,
I'll put it like
by
this.
the way,
well, since you go there, I'll take you one and raise you another one. I was looking at Davis's his parent portal, and I was looking at the emergency contacts, and Aleem is one of them. If he needs to go pick up the kids from school, so.
Glad we sorted out this minor personal issue while we address the world's.
Yeah, but like, look, the point is, like, when you stop and think about the human cost of what you're doing, and it's not like our politics, our political structures, and our constitutional structures are incompatible with recognizing people's humanity. Like, at its core, that's what makes a democracy unique. That's what makes it great. It literally empowers the people. And what is at risk, more broadly speaking, and I know we might talk about a few other topics, but it's just that. Like, when you erode democracy, you erode humanity. And I'm not saying we need to be forcing democracy on every place that we go. But if you're going to hold yourself out as a democracy, you can't just be purely political. Which is also going back to this country, like, where our civic issues, like, people make, trans rights, gay rights, abortion rights. Like, if you make that a people issue, it's totally different. Because as people, they are required to receive these benefits because they are a part of this social agreement. Well, you got to do some intellectual and legal jujitsu to do that, but the end goal is always to take away people's humanity, and that's what's happening here. Whether it's, and I'm not going to say, hey, like, there's fine people on both sides, because I don't want to get to that. What I am going to say, what I am going to say is that there are people on both sides. Right, and every decision that every politician makes needs to be thinking about people,
right,
and not about the politics per se.
But here's the thing, though, is that I reject the idea that there even are two sides in this. This is far more complex than that, because you're talking about an organization that has not had an election for its leadership in, I forget how many years, 15, 16, I forget, right?
It's founded in 2007, I believe.
Whatever, but it's got literally no, like, accountability to the people it purports to represent, right? Meanwhile, you've got another state whose innocent civilians have just been massacred, but who is criticized by the former group for being so much superior in military might and technology and financing and diplomatic ties and all these other things. And then stuck in the middle of all this are a bunch of civilians, most of whom, although some might be politically active, but most of whom Jewish, Muslim, Palestinian, Israeli, atheist, agnostic, whatever, are really concerned with things like getting their kids to school on time, getting to work, and are not, like, want none of this, right? And then you have layered through all of that this notion of proxy warfare that you mentioned quickly a minute ago, John, where you've got other outside powers, whether it's Hezbollah, whether it's Iran, whether it's the United States on the other side of the spectrum, that all have interests in this. But it's the people, like you said, it's the civilians who are stuck in the middle of it and who are going to have to ultimately pay the price. And I think what we've seen is, you were talking a minute ago about sort of the escalation in rhetoric, even on this side of the Atlantic. I would say we've gone past rhetoric now. And this is not just in this conflict. We've seen it with Russia invading Ukraine, and just completely as if everything that came out of the end of World War II, from the United Nations to the Bretton Woods Accords to the foundation of the European Union years later, that as if none of that mattered, right? Right, exactly. we're seeing it. It's going beyond just rhetoric, beyond just having boorish people like Netanyahu or Boris Johnson or Donald Trump. It's gone beyond that. We have people like Vladimir Putin and others who now it's gone from rhetoric to action. Mm. And the disregard for human life that started off on paper or with spoken words is now really translated into bloodshed.
Yeah, I mean, this is actually interesting. And I know we talked about this as another topic, but it was interesting, speaking of Donald Trump, to hear his position on this. I mean, he more or less called
that's an I'm just going to say it's an interesting use of the word interesting.
Well, you know, but he
have words.
But you know, he's basically
he has the best words. He knows all the words.
I've got all the best words. They're best. They're laced in gold.
I went to this thing called a college where I learned the best words.
I was the best at the best college.
The best.
Can I tell you, like living outside this country, how humiliated I would be on an almost daily basis having George W. Bush as president. And then to have Donald Trump, it's like literally what everyone mocks America for being, like fast food, hamburger and fried chicken eating, obese, ignorant, has never read a full book cover to cover. Like I can go on Diet Coke chugging. Oh God.
Like a
44 ounce. 44 ounce. Coke chugging.
We elected a comic book character to our
really. Really? Elected like a literal just
newspaper comic strip character.
Yes.
The world of
yes.
I mean, I also lived abroad in the Bush era. And the last
Middle
year,
East, right?
Yeah, in the Middle East of all places.
Yeah.
And it's funny how much, even by those incalculably stupid times that we lived in politically, those seem sophisticated to where we are now. Like, I couldn't imagine, you know, and like the stark contrast, you know, between like, can you imagine living abroad during the Obama years? You know, and it was like, you know, you've got someone, you know, smart, competent, capable, you know, in representing something beyond where you've been, like representing this next phase in American democracy. Then go to the Trump years where it's like, you know, like Bush, I remember, I'll never forget Bush. I think he was in Iraq or he was somewhere and he gets the shoe thrown at him.
Yeah. You know, we all remember that. Yeah.
But people, people don't understand about that. And a lot of people don't understand, but like, that is the height of disrespect. You know, like if you, in certain countries in the Middle East, if you show someone your foot, even accidentally, you think of all the malicious things that you could say right now, you are gesturing that to them. You know, so watching him get that shoe thrown at him, like forget the security breakdown. It was like, look, you know, there is no greater sign of disrespect that I can give you than to throwing it. If you think about it practically speaking. Like your shoe touches everything nasty. Everywhere you go, everything nasty is what your foot touches or your shoe touches. But at any rate, Donald, it's almost like there's you know, I've been doing some reading on like this new cottage industry in the TV and film industry about just the American decline. You know, like it's an intellectual decline, it's a social decline. You know, where perhaps Americana was aspirational, now it is comic, like it's cartoonish. You know, like, and it doesn't help that we've got, you know, the biggest political figure in this country is not the current president, but it was the other guy. You know, like, you know, that one way or the other is the avatar for the United States, and that's what people think too. Like when they think of the United States, you know, that's and all the people that represent him. You know, or that follow him. You know, like one of the things that we want to talk about was like the real fear in cultism, being in a cult, you know, we're cultivating the cult or whatever. That's a whole other cult. But you know, like it becomes this absence of thinking. You know, like.
But John, wait, just to like actually like drill down on this whole thing here. Remind us all, what exactly did the Donald say? I mean, you were about to make a point before we got off track and started making fun of you. But I mean, like sincerely though, he said what that Hezbollah is really smart. That he said a bunch of just outlandish, insane.
I'm going to basically paraphrase, but he both criticized the Israeli government and praised the brazenness of Hezbollah and Hamas, and he did it on a microphone, like he was being recorded.
Yeah,
you know, like he just basically.
It was at a rally, wasn't it? Wasn't he like he was at a podium, wasn't he?
So I don't know what the end game is, like what you were trying to accomplish. And I put, obviously, in our group chat here, it's like, what's the political goal there? So like, what's the angle? Like,
there's a couple of things at play there. One is that probably around 6 or 7 years ago, he realized that a large percentage of support were from anti-Semites, right? And people who genuinely do not like Jewish people, whether it be Israel or American Jews, they just don't like Jewish people. So he's pandering to them to an extent right now, right? But then on top of that, he got in a conflict with Netanyahu, right? Netanyahu,
right.
See, Donald Trump is the opposite of sophisticated, right? So it's Netanyahu.
You're not even going to dignify him with the word. He's just the opposite of sophisticated.
He's the antonym of something. You know, the whole point is that so Netanyahu. Very quickly, you know, like most leaders in the world will do, just the logical thing of congratulations to the person who's duly elected president. Well, of course, Donald Trump, you know, trying to overturn that election and you know, in his treasonous acts that he was engaged in, said, okay, well, you screwed me, Netanyahu, therefore I don't like it. So he's trying to take a shot at Netanyahu while at the same time trying to pander to his anti-Semitic white nationalist support. Which that's nothing to shake a stick at, so to speak. That's a big deal. That's a big part of his support. Was that he's got a coalition. You know, I always go back to the Hillary Clinton statement of basket of deplorables. I swear, when she said that, I'm like, she said nothing wrong. She should have doubled down on that, because the reality is that most of it, she didn't say all. She said most of his support is a basket of deplorables, and that's really where a large percentage of the supporters of him, of Donald Trump, are deplorable people. They're racists. There's a lot of bigots of various types. There's all kinds of, not just people who are just genuinely misguided. Plenty of them. Sure, I know some of people who are friends of mine who probably either at least didn't vote for the person I voted for, and which wound up being in effect a vote for Donald Trump. But the reality is that's the coalition he's built are people from all over this sector of feeling disaffected by what's going on in the world today, and a large percentage of them are hateful people and people who we never want to cross in a street. We just wouldn't want to speak. We wouldn't want to be involved with, and are deplorable. So in pandering to them, the anti-Semites, and taking shots at Netanyahu leads him to say yet another illogical and foolish thing that he says.
But look, I get all that too, and I think your analysis is sound there. But there are also no less than 70 million born-again Christians in the United States of America. And I forget the percentage of them that are Republican, but it's pretty high.
It's very high.
And central to that is this notion of the repatriation of Jews to Israel, which is a precursor for the rapture. So it's like, and I don't know if he understands all of that. And to your point, maybe he's the antonym of sophisticated.
No, I can answer that for you. No.
I mean, but it's like, he knows enough to know that this base is less politically volatile and, is way more loyal, and they can be publicly loyal to him. And so the question is, it's like, now you were talking about things that are difficult to wrap my head around. Like that one is like a no-brainer. Like if I was just purely interested in politics, and I'm not even going to say that statement because people recorded come back. Anyway, like that's like Republican politics 101. This is a group that you really need to align yourself in the same way that You know, in the Democratic Party, you pick your affinity group to align with. You know, so this one is, and it's like prepackaged. You don't really have to try hard. You know, but I think he also has a whole bunch of mixed messages on abortion, and that's also because he hasn't really led the charge on that. He just elected people.
He's maybe not led the charge. He's paid for a few, though, I think. But yeah,
he's not a Republican. He's just a bad person, like who's adopted the Republican name so he can run for an election. That's really what it is. Now, again, I'm not saying I agree with the Republicans either, but the reality is that he's not really one of them either. But
that's like when somebody was had asked,
he's a rhino.
He really is, but he's not. He's not
a rhino.
I mean, no, he's a usurper, right? He came in, he saw something which is for nearly at that point, by the time he came onto the stage, no, not nearly, by that point for 50 years, right? The Republicans who their quote unquote establishment, right? Like the Mitt Romneys, sort of the white Wall Street guys of the party. That's not a base of support. That's a handful of people. Like statistically, that's not enough people to win anything. And what they had been doing for years, especially since the Southern strategy, the early 1970s and Nixon's campaign, is just foment hate and figure out which chunks of the white population, whether it's evangelical Christians or other groups in the South and in some parts of northern cities too, to be fair, they've been cultivating that resentment against black people, against immigrants, against all different groups. Something wrong in your life, you didn't get that job opportunity you wanted, blame so-and-so. I mean, there's that famous campaign ad from the early 90s of, what was his name? Jesse Helms in North Carolina, the famous one of the guy, crushing up the letter because he didn't get the job he wanted because some affirmative action hire got the job there, whatever it was, right? Like they've been doing that really since they realized that was a strategy to win in the decade after the passage of the Civil Rights Act. He doesn't know all that history that I just kind of rattled off the cliff notes of, but, he could see which people were within which camp and he could think like, all right, well, I can work with them. But, to your point about him just being a bad person and not a true Republican, of course, I mean, like that was when, Joe Scarborough got interviewed, not on his show, but I think it was on Real Time. And he was talking about when people say like, well, I don't like his rhetoric. I don't like him personally, but I like his policies. And his reaction was, what the F does that mean? He changes his mind about any given issue every single day not to suit any sort of Republican ideology or any sort of political endgame, but just to suit himself personally. It's all about him personally.
Exactly. Well, so I don't know if there was.
But in the context of the United States, though, and our politics, and kind of bringing this full circle back to the main story, like he's also the same guy who maybe he felt justified in saying all this because of the beef he imagines he has with Netanyahu. But this is also the same guy who said horrific things that if any Jewish American knew what was good for them or actually knew their history, they would always vote for him because he's the best for Israel. And then he goes and says this crap this week.
Like, what? Like, he's insane. Like, it's kind of painful to see that people actually think he has a couple of brain cells. It's like he's not there. Like, why?
He's not there.
Amazing. It's amazing. I don't know, but anyway,
he is not there. He is like the like. I've heard back in college, I would have heard more logical tirades coming out of the mouth of someone who had been drinking all night. It's now 3:00 in the morning than I've ever heard come out of Donald Trump's mouth. I mean, I know the guy claims he doesn't do anything. I think it's been widely reported he's actually a closeted speed freak and snorts Adderall, but whatever you got to do, man, to get through the day. I'm not here to judge, but like the guy claims that he doesn't do any drugs, doesn't drink, whatever. So whatever he's saying, that's just him. Like that's just how gone he is. That's
you can't
whatever brain he's got left.
That's a good point. I'm gonna offer one more thought on Donald Trump, something from pop culture that probably go back 4 years or so, but I may have mentioned it. I think maybe you were there over at John's house. I may have mentioned it years ago. But there's a movie that I was actually turned on to by some colleagues of mine many years ago, probably 10, 12 years ago, called Being.
Okay.
It stars Dr. Strangelove, actor,
Okay.
I forget his name, but anyway, basically, he plays the main character, a guy who's been locked away, who basically was a housekeeper, if you will, for a very wealthy family in the middle of D.C. Never left the house for years. The owners of the house passed away. Basically, they kicked him out the house, and he comes out of the house all of a sudden in late 1970s, Washington D.C. He's basically trying to find his way, and he's not educated at all. But he's white, and he looks like a normal white guy. He has a suit, and he walks around. He says very few words, and he winds up bouncing from place to place. And somebody hits him with their car, and he says again very few words. They take him in, and eventually he winds up becoming a political star because everybody affixes to what he says or does not say as what they're thinking and feeling, right? They find in him what they want to see, and because he's saying so little. So the correlation is that Donald Trump is saying so many words that mean nothing, but people are affixing sense logic to them that doesn't really exist, but it suits them. So it's like, I like his policies. Well, what did he just say? Like, I don't know, but it sounded. We cheered for it, and it's like, and that sort of thing. So check out Being There. Peter
Being
Sellers.
There, okay.
Peter Sellers. Yeah.
I mean, it's funny because I just to speak about sort of fiction and its reflection on what we're going through right now in the world. I remember seeing a tweet during the Trump administration from someone saying like, I apologize to George Orwell. I always thought 1984 was too simplistic. And looking at it now, like when things do go south, it really is just this stupid. And so actually I was going through Audible on my phone because I always listen to audiobooks while I'm out walking the dogs or in the car. And I had 1984 in there. And so I started listening to the audiobook while I'm walking the dogs. And it's terrifying just how similar that fictional prediction is to what we've been living through in the past 5, 6, 7 years at least. But two, like, no, it really is that simplistic and stupid. Like it's not even that there's a big, complicated series of machinations and yada yada. It's like, no, it's just this decline of critical thinking, decline of introspection, decline of any appreciation for the generations of hard work and millions of people who contributed to the society that you've inherited in your present time. All of these things. And it's just as stupid as he sort of fictionally predicted.
Yeah, absolutely.
But did you guys see Don't Look Up?
Oh, yeah.
I don't think
I'm not going to ruin it, but if you want kind of a modern day, and I'm pretty sure I read 1984 in high school and don't remember it. I've gravitated more towards Brave New World, but I think but anyway, Don't Look Up. The premise is it's a combination of gaslighting and idiocy, and the gaslighting is really the piece that really drives it, because at some point no one has any critical thinking skills, and the people that have an interest in staying in power, keeping their authority, work really hard to make sure that people aren't. You don't have to think critical. It's just like knowing what you're seeing, and once they realize that they know that you can draw conclusions when you look, they just tell you don't look at it. Like, it is actually, I thought it was going to be a comedy. I thought it was going to be hilarious. It was, and I actually watched it when I had COVID the first time. I was like, man, I'm not feeling really good after watching this movie. Like, this is no, I should have watched this during the day.
In terms of the, no, I had the same mistake because they really did bill it as a comedy. Like, Jonah Hill is in it. By the end, you're like, I need to go for a walk or something. It's, because Aleem, like, again, not to ruin it for you, but basically the premise is, and that's why they're saying don't look up to the sky, is it's the scientists coming to the White House saying, like, something bad's going to happen. There's going to be this big disaster. And the answer is, you know what? That might be a good news story for like next week, but like right now that's just not going to work for us. They're like, no, this is not like an optics thing. Like, if we don't act, there's going to be a problem. And everyone's like so concerned with maintaining their image and their status and their position that they don't even listen to the scientists. And yeah, by the, like, it very much was advertised as a comedy. And by the end, you're like, oh.
You know, it's funny.
This is happening right now. This is happening.
One of the other stories, and you know, that we had in our chat, and we don't have to talk about it because it's a really interesting and convoluted. Interesting is the wrong word. It's a really convoluted, if not idiotic, legal argument. But basically, Donald Trump is a litigant in Colorado to stay on the ballot in Colorado.
Yes,
and there is a group that is organized that has filed a petition to have him removed. And his legal argument, which apparently he lifted stock in trade from the Wall Street Journal, was that he had no obligation to support the U.S. Constitution as the president, and that the 14th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, was constructed in such a way that it basically was meant to apply to elected officials of Congress and other elected officials, but didn't apply to the president. I had to read it a couple of times to really understand, and I think I'm, you know, somewhat predisposed to understanding complex legal arguments. But it was like, I don't even understand.
If you do say so yourself.
Well, I mean, like, look, I'm just saying because of education, like, you know. But it's like,
I'm just teasing you. Yes, I get it. I get it.
I am easily offended.
Just to clarify for the listeners and myself, is that Donald Trump is the one making the argument that he has no obligation to uphold the 14th.
That he has no obligation.
Oh, no.
He basically, his oath of office didn't obligate him to support the Constitution. That is, generally speaking, his argument.
That's his argument. Yes.
Yeah.
Now the argument.
No, not generally speaking. That is verbatim his argument, wasn't it? Wasn't that actually in the response to the complaint?
Yeah, it was in it, but like the hoops that they go through within the 14th Amendment, and you know they have, you know, it's funny, you know, like everyone's an originalist until they need to read in some context that benefits them. You know, so he completely abandons this originalist argument. Like, no, the text is, well, no, what the text really meant, and the framers, when they were writing up the 14th Amendment, they actually meant this. And it's like, the judge was like, no. You know, basically, that argument doesn't work. Obviously, there's a concern that, you know, it escalates, because I believe this is in Colorado Supreme Court, which seems weird. But yeah, it was.
No, it's not weird. It actually makes sense. I mean, that one detail I think does actually make sense because it's the citizens group based there. They are using the state court because the states manage and run and operate their own elections, even for federal office holders, right? So I mean, that part. I'm sure if they do rule in the favor of the plaintiffs and keep him off the ballot, I'm sure it will escalate and there'll be arguments made to move the case to federal court on appeal. But I don't know.
What I do like about this is that the headline itself is worth its weight in gold. You know, like forget just Democrats, like if anyone that recognizes, which I think is legitimate, the threat not just of Donald Trump, but the threat of what he represents to our democracy, getting him on the record saying I had no obligation to support the Constitution with my oath of office. One, what's your word worth then? And two, what's the Constitution worth? Like, you can't be the president of law and order, quote unquote, and when the law doesn't suit you, you just throw it out. And I know that that's not a novel argument. People make it all the time.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's like, this is like, and you would think like, oh man, there's so many times when he's made this crystallized, you know, argument for where he stands, that it should be the thing that is like, hey, that he's telling you who he is. It should be apparent to other people. But, you know, I'm not optimistic that it'll be the case. But it is, with that said, like, if I had to run a campaign right now, it's like, look, you know, he's not the law and order candidate, you know, or I would frame it differently. You know, like he is the when it suits you candidate.
Exactly.
Can I just say though, because I hear what you're saying and the words make sense. Everything lines up what you're saying, right? But it's also the same mistake that I see a lot of analysts and pundits making right now about Donald Trump and about that what we would see as that hypocrisy, right? Between him not just saying this in this most recent court filing, but also doing things like attacking the federal judiciary, attacking a judge's clerk, his supporters calling for a wholesale investigation, or if not destruction and disbanding of the FBI, all because it doesn't suit him, right? Like, we see how there's that contrast between him saying he's the law and order guy versus him actually flouting the law and attacking law enforcement. January 6th, anyone. But I think that this goes back to sort of that earlier point that Aleem was making, and that I followed up on, about the fact that he saw the people who vote Republican en masse, not the Wall Street guys at the top of the party, but the rest, all of the resentment driven white voters that they have that actually win their elections for them. And he saw that, and that's how he found his political home, so to speak. And he usurped that movement. But in the context of that, what we should understand as outsiders to that movement is when he's saying law and order, he's not literally talking about upholding the Constitution and, being in love with the rule of law and peace and stability. He's not Jamie Raskin, right? He's not a constitutional scholar. What he's doing is he's using law and order in the same context it would have been used in the 1960s and 70s. It's code for, we are going to keep Black people, Mexicans, migrants, people of color, anybody coming into this, we're going to keep them in their place. That's what he's saying. He's not saying that he wants to have a fairer, more just society for all. He's saying law and order as a dog whistle for, if you keep me in power, you bring me back into power, I'm going to keep perpetuating white supremacy and keep on keeping other people down. That's why his people are not dissuaded. That's why to them there is no inconsistency or anything about what he's saying and doing now that detracts from their message, because they know, even if they're not going to articulate it or can't articulate it, they know at their gut what he actually is getting at, what he's saying.
So since we're still on Donald Trump for a moment, something from the music industry. I don't know if you guys have heard this artist goes by the name of Sexy Red. She's very popular these days. Oh. She's made some very vulgar songs and that sort of thing. But you basically, if you're on the internet, you're going to hear her song behind various things. A couple of songs she made. You can look her up.
Okay.
That she's I think she's from St. Louis. Very following, the following is growing. She's very popular. She performed, I think, at the BET Awards. So she's her popularity for a couple of songs put her on big stages, especially in the urban community, right, and amongst Black folks. She was doing an interview recently, the last couple of weeks, with somebody. I forget who it was, but they asked her about Trump, right? And now, by the understanding I have, she comes from a very a community that's going through some things financially. St. Louis, if you know anything about St. Louis, there's challenges there, right? And that's what right. So she says, oh yeah, well when he started letting Black folks out of jail and giving us checks and this type of thing, and we like Trump, we need Trump back in there. That's what she said, right? So I credit Angela Rye, you're familiar with her.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Did a couple of posts on it to try and speak to people about that, because she has a large following of young Black folks who probably don't pay all that much attention to politics, right? People under the age of 20, 22, 23, younger folks, right? People are new voters at that. And Angela Rye, tried to, in the most respectful way she could, pour into this but but basically the bottom line is that, and I think what's pervasive in the community of people that I just described, and the voters, those new voters, is that they believe those things, right? They think that he actually started letting Black people out of jail, that obviously that they may feel were unjustly incarcerated. Criminal justice reform, if you escalate that conversation to the intellectual argument, criminal justice reform, they actually think he had a part in that, and that actually did something for them. I blame to some extent certain people in the discourse for giving him that giving them those props undeservedly, that help mislead people in that. But he also, she misunderstood the giving people checks, right? So what she was referring to was the COVID funding that the Democrats forced down his throat, basically,
right?
That he did not want to sign, that the Republicans fought against, that he eventually had to sign because everybody knew that it was.
Aleem, did you say Angela Rye?
Yeah, Angela Rye. Yeah.
You said that she's a rapper?
No.
What? What?
Angela Rye rebutted the rapper.
I was about to say.
On social media.
I was like,
yeah.
What?
Yeah.
I don't know, Angela Rye, but she might have some bars to spit.
She's multi-talented. I don't know.
She can speak pretty well,
Who was the rapper? Who was the rapper again?
Sexy Red, I think is her name.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember how to spell. There's some double letters in that somewhere, so I don't know which.
I'm sure. It's amazing how few current artists I actually know anything about.
Well, you don't want to know anything about this.
No, you don't. I'm going to tell you the first thing I saw that came up. But,
she is horrible. Like, she's horrible. I mean, I know anybody listening to me in this podcast is going to be like, "Oh, you're hating," but no, she's terrible. Like, her rhymes are horrible.
Okay.
Her lyrics are horrible.
Yo, but here's the thing, and and there is I think a political connection. I mean, you're drawing the political connection. But the other thing, as it pertains to music and hip hop, like at some point, like the game and the aim has changed, right? So where Republicans for so long get credit, albeit maybe unjustifiably, is they're fiscally conservative. They make good decisions with money, but really, if you unravel
it's not true.
They will make sure that people with money have more of it, and they can maybe somewhat credibly say, "Well, money is money. Who has it doesn't make a difference. You can get this money." I don't even think that's totally believable, but I think that as a notion, even within the black community, has some resonance because it's like, look, we're not racist. We want everyone to get money. Yeah, I mean, don't look at that other stuff that we did that's clearly racist. We're just about the money.
Right.
And then I think when you see that creep into the music industry, and it's just like, well, hey, like whatever we need to do to get this money, So and I'm not making it up. Just listen to some rap music, any rap music between 1987 and right now. Like the end goal, the stated end goal is really clear. So if Donald Trump is like, hey, I'm gonna lower taxes for rich people, and I'm gonna make it easier for everyone to be rich. No different than Ronald Reagan in the 80s, right. Black Monday. Then, like you've got, maybe you've got a captive audience. And at the same time, it's like, yeah, well, we don't want all these other people to get money either. So if I align with you, I'll get money, we'll exclude other people. Now, you can start to really read in between the lines and figure out what that is. But when I see someone like this, like at this point, it's formulaic. Like Lil' Kim, Foxy Brown, maybe a few other artists in the early 90s. Like they got into this niche, they got into this market. They reveal a lot. And I'm not slut shaming anyone, but when I am saying, as a function of like, yo, this is a market segment that we can now capitalize on, like being scantily clad and raunchy. And a lot of people have made money, and now you see more and more artists come out and they're like, look, like I can be raunchy. Like that's easy. Like I don't mean it. Just like, like when being a gangster rapper, I hate that phrase, but like when hardcore, whatever you want to call it, like rapping about guns and drugs, when that became popularized, everyone was like, yo, well, I can rap about guns and drugs. Like my favorite example is Cassidy, the rapper from Philly. Like, I don't know if you remember his story, Aleem, but as a kid, he didn't grow up too far away from me. And everyone was like, yo, man, you rapping about this, but you're not that because you're from Mount Airy. He's like, I'll show you. I'll show you. And then he just goes and kills somebody. Like, and this is after he was famous, like to get credibility. So it's like, people will go to great lengths to do it. But it's like, if you, buy into this, this ethos where it's just like, hey, we're all about this money thing. And we'll make sure that you get money by lowering taxes, even if it destroys everything, but you've got yours.
You got yours. Exactly.
And I think Trump's folks, they're like, yeah, well, if you're about this money thing, and we can all get money together, and the problem is those coloreds, well, like, just get rid of them, and then we can all go back to getting this money, even if they've been taking all the money from you the whole time. Like, it ain't coming back.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's the thing, though, is like, even if it's not about them getting, I mean, ideally they would like to get that money, but what they'll settle for, and they've proven they'll settle for, is not getting money through any policies that he would enact when he's in office. What they'll settle for, though, is in the absence of that, the explicit cruelty against the people who they think are undeserving. And that's the whole point,
all the way
right?
full circle.
I mean, like, well, it's true, though. I mean, we are living in an era where cruelty is being glorified in a way that we haven't seen in our lifetimes. And I know we have to wrap up, but we could in another day go through I think we could actually show somewhat of a through line there from going from money obsession and selfishness and intellectual decline to cruelty. I do not think that they are unrelated. I think they're causally related. I think that's how we arrive where we are right now. But it, yeah, I don't know where I'm just going to go with that.
I want to pick up on that, though. I heard about this in church today, and like, look, I'm going to make a conscious argument. Like, I'm not going to participate in the culture of cruelty. We can have a discussion about something without it having to be oppositional. Like, we can disagree without it. Like, and I was listening to, I don't know what ESPN is up to. I used to love, but like, every show is not about conflict. Like, the only thing that can sell is like conflict. Like, you got to be yelling at the top of your lungs in opposition. It doesn't even matter what it is. Like, and that's the only way we can communicate. Like, it's so binary. And like, nah, man, like, everything isn't, we're not all, we don't need to fight every time. Like, it does.
Here's my hopeful moment, and Christian, maybe we can start into the next segment whenever we do it with this topic of sports and music and the culture. But my thought is this: is that my hopeful moment is that I feel as though there's still an appetite in our society, in our culture, in our American culture, in fact, for civil discourse. Right? I feel as though people do still want that. They just don't know that they want it because they haven't seen it work effectively. They see it fail, right? They see people who are not so good at it, frankly, and then they see it devolve into, arguments. Yeah. They see it devolve into what you're describing, John, on ESPN. They see that happen constantly, and that is sensational, and it is what they encourage to put in our faces. But once they understand that doesn't work, and that the alternative is effective, maybe.
Can we shout out Jon Stewart real quick?
Oh yeah.
Jon Stewart called this 20 years ago.
Yeah. Jon Stewart is he's a smart dude. He said a lot.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but in those 20 years though, we went from having. There was already things like Crossfire on CNN. But there was also things like the McLaughlin Group on PBS, and some things that were a little more thoughtful. And even at that point, the same shows that we have now, we already had, like the Sunday morning shows where it was not nearly as sensational as they are now. Now at this point, though, a few things happened. One was that ESPN actually started a lot of this. It actually did not originate inside the Beltway. It was the fact it was just the media market. Yeah. And they found out that those sort of moments of the talking heads screaming at each other over, player skills and sports scores and all that sort of stuff got better ratings than any sort of debate would, like thoughtful debate. And so they applied that to the political talk shows, and they mirrored them and structured them exactly based on ESPN, based on SportsCenter, right? And so there was that first part.
No, I'm not. I would give more of that talk radio. Like, I'm from Philly, man, and like
that happened too.
ESPN came up. They came in late. I mean, like, if you listen to Philly talk radio, basically at any point in the history, you listen to it right now. Like, actually, don't. Don't. If Twitter, exactly. If Twitter was like actual voices, like it would be right. I mean, I don't know about the New York area, Aleem. I can only imagine.
No, you're right. But I'm just saying now, radio doesn't get much play. Now it's Twitter. him, and you know.
And no, and you're totally right about talk radio, both in terms of sports talk radio and political talk radio, and with Rush Limbaugh starting with that. But I was more referring to sort of the video, the TV format where you actually have visuals. But the other thing I was going to say, though, is that then since Jon Stewart called that out, we've had this explosion of social media where everything is driven by clicks, and advertising dollars are driven by clicks, the same as on TV, they're driven by ratings. And you're going to get clicks based off of anger and outrage. And social media companies know this. I mean, Meta has researched this for years now, and they find that even more than sex, anger sells. Anger is the number one thing that keeps people, because it doesn't just gain a momentary reaction. They found that, again, even more than sex or cars or anything else, it will keep people tied up and engaged with the platform the longest, which then gives them more time to serve more ads. And it's, again, to bring it another full circle, it really is just that stupid.
And that, ladies and gentlemen.
So. Yeah, exactly. And that was this week's stupidity.
Being with Peter Sellers, check out Sexy Red and Angela Rye's response to her. Check out what we have various things for people to go take a look at.
Yes, indeed. And of course, do not forget to like, share, subscribe, tell all your friends about the podcast. It really does help us all, and thank you. Thanks, guys. It's been a great conversation.
Go Birds.